We have a small development office that's designed to accommodate and help with film and television workflows. So what I'm going to spend the next half hour or so doing is actually going through and showcasing some of the real world workflows that maybe don't get a lot of attention, because a lot of these workflows are things that, Creative Cloud's all about having everything at your fingertips to do your job, right? If you want to output video, you've got Audition for audio, Premiere Pro for editorial, After Effects for motion graphics. But many times when you work in the professional broadcasting or film world, we oftentimes have to take what we're editing inside of Adobe Premiere and go out to other applications. We need to be able to send the sound out for doing final sound mixing, maybe in another application at a different facility on the other side of town or on the other half of the state. And so because of this, there are specific workflows that we recommend, and I'm going to kind of go through some best practices dealing with these different workflows. Now, before I get started, I also just wanted to point out that we do have over 100 different partners that are actually here at NAB. And so depending on the broadcaster that you're working for, depending on what your needs are, there are all of these different partners here at the show. So it's an awesome opportunity, since in many cases a broadcast workflow requires a number of additional components that maybe are outside of Creative Cloud. We have a very extensive architecture that allows our partners to build things out. And if you want to take a picture of this URL, it's a fantastic little tool that we have online for finding partners, adobe-video-partner-finder.com. You can go through and search for different types of partners like asset management systems, ingest acquisition systems, sending your final projects to air, ENPS integration. These types of technologies exist, and because of the extensibility architecture within the Adobe Creative Cloud tools, it enables our partners to have rich integration, panels directly within Premiere for doing things like searching through an asset library and dragging and dropping directly into your timeline. So something to be aware of. I'm going to put one other resource up on the screen here that I also want to point to, and that is this very, very simple URL here. And what this is, I've been working on a series of training and tutorial videos that cover some of these specific workflows. So things I'm not going to have time to cover today, things like how to deliver audio splits out of Premiere, where you need to deliver a mix plus the dialogue and the effects and the music all as separated audio tracks. Some of what I'm covering today, if you need a refresher course, they're available. This is part of the Adobe playlist on YouTube. But when you use this URL to get to it, you'll get a special curated playlist that is specific to Hollywood, as well as showing some examples from some of our customers and some of the different roundtable discussions of what we're actually doing inside of the film and television world, how to use some of the technologies I'm about to show you here. Now, with that, I am going to go ahead and get started. And to start with, I want to talk a little bit about one of the most important parts of the workflow, and that is the ingest process. If you are working with, you're planning on just delivering everything yourself, you can pretty much work in any method of ingesting your files. Use Media Browser to bring in your files, bring them in through a Finder window, the importer. The one key thing, if you do need to plan on turning over for sound, turning over for color, sending your edits out using these standard interchange file formats, it's very important that metadata pass across with that. Oftentimes, editing that's being done is not being done with the original camera files. It's being done with a file that's already got some color information burned into it. It's got some CDL values burned into it from the cinematographer. And so we need to track all of this information. The editor becomes more like a data spreadsheet that we're kind of tracking from place to place. So a key component of these types of film and television workflows is making sure that we get that metadata information in as soon as possible at the beginning of the workflow. If I just import a file, sometimes these files are going to have some metadata information, sometimes not. Here I have metadata columns in Premiere. I've used the metadata display panel, and I've used the new functionality in the flyout menu to have a special view for this metadata. We have a new function where I can actually have different view presets for different types of metadata displays. So I've got color information associated here, and right away I can see that there's no CDL information. This should have these big long list of numbers here of the color information that was burned into this file. They don't exist here. So how do I get around that? Well, if you are managing the files yourself, Premiere actually does have a special workspace called the meta logging workspace that's designed to allow you to quickly go in and enter that information. So if you're using Premiere to generate proxy files or offline media, we do have a workflow within Premiere to do this if that's your job. In Hollywood, typically that's somebody called a DIT that's doing that on set. They're using specialized tools to generate these editorial files, and they're embedding metadata in the files themselves, or in some cases, they're providing that as an external file. The most common file format for doing that is something called an ALE file. Now, an ALE file is a human-readable text file. It's kind of like a comma-delimited or a tab-delimited text file. You can open up an ALE file in a spreadsheet application like Excel and actually read through the different columns of metadata. It contains kind of a file header about these files, and then it contains metadata in columns that are associated with the files. Outside of professional, the film and television world, not a lot of people know that Premiere Pro reads ALE files, so that's one of the reasons I'm here talking about it. When I bring in an ALE file first, Premiere will automatically, I'm just going to click on options here, make sure I'm putting this in a subfolder. When I do this, this brings in, basically these are containers for all of my media. And that ALE file can contain information like scene and take information, log note information. There are my CDL values. So now I actually know that the color information, when I send this edit off for doing final color at maybe Technicolor or some other production house, they're going to have that information is going to pass along with the edit. Now, there is one extra step if I use an ALE file, is I do need to link the media, because an ALE file can be linked to different versions of the media. In this case, I just need to point this at one of the clips. So it's a very quick process. And just like that, I've got a full day of dailies ingested, and I've got all the appropriate metadata. Now, if you're relying on another production team to do the metadata, sometimes little bits and pieces can end up missing in the process, and it might be a day or two before this gets noticed. Very common to call somebody up at the DIT house and ask, hey, can I get an updated ALE? You forgot to put the lookup tables or the LUT information in the metadata when these were initially created. Premiere has an ability, rather than having to manually go in and add that information, copy and paste it across multiple clips, we have a tool under the clip menu called Update Metadata, and this enables me to bring in an updated version of the ALE file so that I can add in additional information at a point later on. So again, very, very quick, and by having this all in an external file, it can be modified. I can do things like search and replace if I need to change things out, using any tool that works with text files. So that's why ALE files are kind of a standard, and that's the reason that they're used like this, because it's a one-stop shop for all of this metadata information. The worst part about my job sometimes is when I hear from a customer that, they basically did something they shouldn't have done, like take the sound files and the picture files, and they merged them into a new piece of media, and now they're trying to go out and go to do a final sound turnover. They're trying to link to the original audio source files, but there's no information about what that is. The timecode information is completely different. That creates a whole problem where you have to kind of do a manual overcut, and I never like to see that. So this is one of those cases. Doing it right to begin with does make a big difference if we are going to do these turnovers. The next part of this, really quickly, I want to cover is syncing sound and picture. And the way to do this, the way we recommend doing this, is to do it using multicam. Even if you're just shooting with one camera, multicam gives you a batch process for doing it. It also allows you to go back in and nudge clips around. And most importantly, the metadata information, the original file names, get passed across when you go to do your turnovers at the end of the workflow. As an example here, I'm just going to take all of these clips, got everything selected, quickly say create multi-camera source sequence. We're fortunate we can sync based on time code. If the sound time code was different and that metadata was in the files, we could use sound time code. I'm going to leave everything else pretty much alone. Move source clips to process clips bin. This will let me know what has been synced, and if there's anything that wasn't, it'll leave it alone. Lastly, this setting here for sequence settings where it says camera 1, that's actually an important thing. If some of the files in your selection are audio-only files, Premiere will know to just keep that audio and mute any of the other audio from the cameras, any of the other scratch tracks. So, how quickly can this do this? I've seen people do 80 shots in about 10 or 15 seconds. It's very, very easy. So as dailies are coming in, we can quickly create these multicams. Now this message here is just telling me some clips could not be synchronized, and that's because I was very indiscriminate about my selection. I had B-roll in here, which I know I don't have a sound roll associated with it. So that's perfectly normal, but you can see how it's created all of these different groups. And if I start to look at these groups, you always have the ability with a multicam to open a multicam in a timeline view. The cameras will be stacked on top of each other, and you can go through and double check and make sure that the clap happens at the appropriate time. Everything is synced. If you need to nudge things over a frame or two because you had sync drift happening, you have the ability to do that. I can double check both cameras just by turning these off and just double checking and making sure that the multiple cameras are synchronized. The last part of this is just dealing with multiple channels of audio. I'm going to go ahead and create an edit sequence here. I'll just use a preset that matches my frame rate and resolution here. If I take one of these multicam clips and load it in my source monitor, let's actually look at the other camera here. I kind of like this shot better. If I start to cut this into my sequence, I may end up, there's a good example, this one here. This source clip has 5 different microphones that were recorded on set. I've got a credit on a comedy special where each version of the comedy special, each set of multicam clips had something like 35 microphones because they want to make sure and get the right crowd reaction from wherever it is in the room. I don't want to have to see all 35 of those. I don't want those showing up in my patching over here on the side of my timeline when I'm trying to cut. I really just need A1. I want the master mix to cut with, but I need to be able to go back to those additional microphones later on when we're fine-tuning the temp sound mix. So to deal with that, the simple and easiest way to do that, if I right-click on this, I can go to modify the audio channels, and you'll notice here this is showing that it's got 5 audio clips, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to basically say, you know what, I just want one master mix, and if it's on A1, that's great. If it was on A5, I could just change the checkbox here to match whichever one I want to cut from. And now, at this point, you'll notice that the source patching has changed to V1 and A1. So now, as I cut this into my sequence, I'm only dealing with one audio track. Very, very easy if I'm listening to my shot and I say, you know what, this is, there's somebody brushed the microphone in the master mix. I need to go get another isolated microphone shot. I can double-click on the audio track. I can come in here and hit match frame, go back to my edit, and I'm lined up precisely where I am here. So now I could come in and say, you know what, let's try cutting in A3, and we'll give A3 a listen. I'll just choose to overwrite this and add it in as a separate track. And basically, we've got synchronized audio jumping in from a different track in my project. So there's one other thing just to be aware of here. I'm realizing I didn't turn on one particular keyboard shortcut here in my timeline, I like to do something called match frame sets endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on just to make sure. So now as I'm looking at this, if I double click on this, hit match frame, it is automatically marking that as my endpoint so that as I cut this in, it's cutting in the correct thing. That looks a little better. Okay. Now, beyond this, collaboration is a big part of the way people work. Instead of having one editor doing all of the work, we typically have a lead editor. You can have multiple assistant editors on a feature film. Most scripted dramas at least have a pair of a lead and an assist working on the show together. So we need to be able to collaborate. Premiere Pro, the Adobe mindset towards collaboration, we actually see multiple ways of doing this. You may have heard of something called team projects. And team projects is definitely something we're seeing used in the Hollywood space for shorter form content. But the thing about team projects, it's very forward thinking. It leverages the cloud. So if your production team is comfortable with having project information living in a database in the cloud, being able to work across distances effectively, team projects is the collaborative solution for you. There's lots of information online on how team projects works. For today, I want to focus on the other type of collaboration because the people that I work with, many times facilities have to be MPAA certified, and in doing this, that means that none of the editing stations can have any internet connectivity whatsoever. So a cloud-based solution is not the right thing in those environments. So we have a different type of collaboration, something called shared projects, which I'm going to spend some time talking about. The best thing about this is you can leverage both of these in an overall collaboration. I've got some projects right now where the primary editorial group is based in an office in Southern California. They're sharing files, they're working with project locking together, but at the same time the director is off in a different city, in a different location, and when he needs to see an edit, they're using a team project to share that edit across those great distances. So the two will work together just depending on what your needs are. So this slide kind of talks a little bit about what the benefits of each of them are, what the limitations of each of them are. They're both fantastic tools for working. Right now I'm going to focus more on the shared projects workflow, which again, this is designed to work locally so that we don't need any type of internet connectivity in order to function. So I'm going to go ahead and close out some sequences. I'll go ahead and close this out here so we can kind of start from scratch. Go ahead and close all. And basically the idea behind a shared project workflow is we're leveraging the fact that Premiere Pro can open up multiple projects simultaneously. You guys have seen this already. I've been doing it up here. One of the greatest things about the release last year was the fact that we added this ability to have multiple projects open. In order to prevent people from overwriting each other's work, in the past, two people opening the same project, oh, I save over your work, you save over my work. We don't want that happening. So we introduced at the same time the concept of project locking. So in the preferences, I can turn on project locking. I can put a name in here so that I know that if I open up a project, other people are not going to have the ability to overwrite my work. Now, what that actually does, just so you know, on disk, what that actually does is it generates something called a PR lock file that is next to the original project. So from a troubleshooting perspective, if you're somebody who works in a facility, occasionally an editor will go home early. Somebody else needs to jump in and work on that project. Oh, wait, it's locked. What are we going to do? In this situation, you can delete these lock files. Do not delete these lock files just for fun, because obviously that's going to defeat the purpose. You just know you have a very easy way of unlocking something if something does go awry and you need to get into that project and make changes to it. Now, the idea behind this is I can organize a larger project into smaller, more bite-sized chunks that a production team can each work on a different piece of the project concurrently. Right now, if you look at this layout of bins that I have, If you see the different bins or folders that have the shortcut icon, the little arrow on them, each of those are referencing a different Premiere Pro project that's on the hard drive. So instead of having one project that's got all of my dailies, all of my sound effects, all of my sequences, that takes a little while to open up because Premiere likes to touch every piece of media within that project. By the way, how many people here have like a library of sound effects? It's like numbers in the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands. You know, having all of those in the project is great because they're ready to go, but when you open up the project, Premiere's got to touch each and every one of those files. It can slow things down a little bit if I'm just going in to make a quick change. So by breaking this up into smaller segments, different people can be working on different parts of the project simultaneously and not overwrite or interfere with each other's work. So let me show you a little bit about how this works as an example here. First off, if I have an existing project and I want to add it to this starting project, this master project, this is where everybody goes in first. There's no sequences or media in here. We kind of keep it that way just for simplicity. If I want to add an additional project, I can just import the project. So in this case, what I'm going to do here, let me go into this folder. And under additional projects, I've got this extra project here called loops. So this is a bunch more music loops that we can use. I'll go ahead and hit import. Premiere now offers this third option here to import this as a shared project. What that means is it's not going to touch the project over on the disk as it is. It's not going to import a bunch of things into this project. It's just going to make a shortcut, an easy way that I can double click to get into that particular project. I'll go ahead and do that. There's the shortcut, and I'm just going to throw that in my production elements folder for simplicity. If I wanted to just create a brand new project, as dailies are coming in when day 3 happens, I can click on this new item button and hit shared project and create day 3. And what that will do is that actually creates a new Premiere Pro project on disk, and I'm just going to move that into my dailies folder here, but it puts it in the same location that any of my other shared projects happen to be. So we try and give you a little bit of organizational structure within your Finder level so that all of the dependent projects in this shared project workflow, they're all located in the same location. Now, working with this means everybody starts by opening the master project, and from there they dive into the pieces that they're going to be working with. So if I'm in the, this is the cut that I'm currently working on, I can be in this cut, I can be working, making changes. At the same time, I could be inside of the day 3 project, I could be inside of, pulling from some of the other dailies projects here, or even if I needed to see what Mike Burton is working on. Notice his name is right here. This is the director of the film. He's actually doing a little bit of cutting himself today, it looks like. I can see that that's locked. Premiere doesn't prevent me from opening that. I can double click on it and open it, but it opens in a locked read-only state. So I can't make any changes. If I grab something and try and move it, it's not going to let me go down the rabbit hole of cutting in a locked project, and then when I go to save my changes, it suddenly says, oh, wait, this is locked. You got to save as. Now you got to reconsolidate things, and you got to reorganize your project. If I need to make a copy of this sequence, I could grab it and move it into my project and start to modify it from there. But you have to make that copy up front. I still have the ability to load Mike's version of the sequence in my source monitor if I needed, so that if I'm trying to cut into my project, I can easily do that. Come over here, I could take an in and out point from Mike's sequence and actually cut this into the sequence that I own. So that's the basic idea of how shared projects work. You can organize, this is a fairly simple example here with these master projects. I've seen examples of this where each scene bin is actually a separate Premiere Pro project so that an assistant can be working on one scene while the lead editor is working on another scene. There's no limitation to the number of shared projects you can have within one Premiere Pro project. So some of the feature films we have that are working on right now have over 200 different Premiere Pro projects on disk, but they're all organized in this master project in a way that at a glance you can see who has what open and what is available to be worked on. So very elegant way of working. All right, I'm almost out of time. I want to touch on export functionality. When you're working inside of Premiere Pro and it's time to start doing these turnovers, the most important thing to note is when we go to export this out, we support a range of different formats. These are standard industry formats for doing interchange between applications outside of the Adobe suite. So depending on what job you're doing and what type of export file you're going to need, some of that really does depend on the particular post house, finishing house that you're working with. You're going to want to look at what kind of deliverables they're going to ask for. Some very common workflows for audio. We do support the older OMF format, but this is actually a deprecated format. We're not recommending OMF. Modern versions of tools like Pro Tools use what is called an AAF file, and we work very closely with the Avid team to make sure that moving from Premiere into Pro Tools is a valid workflow. Using the AAF format, you'll notice if you saw it very quickly on the screen there, there's a simplifying project menu that comes up just momentarily. It goes through your entire timeline and it simplifies down all those multicam shots so that the original file names, everything passes across, all the metadata from the original source clips is going to end up inside the AAF file. If you have to do multiple AAF exports as you're doing multiple versions of a turnover, save them to the same folder and use separate audio. The first AAF, it's going to render and create the new media for the AAF file. Any further AAFs, if you're exporting to the same file, it does smart rendering. It only renders the new media that might have been added since the last time you exported. So those become much faster. For color turnovers, this still kind of drives me crazy, but it's the world we live in. EDL files. CMX 3600 EDL is a format that has not been modified officially since 1977. Again, Hollywood, risk averse. It worked before, we'll continue to make it work. There's been a lot of unofficial changes and modifications to the EDL file format over the years, so that a lot of more modern things like color decision lists, CDL values, LUT names and information can be passed across in an EDL file. A lot of what the team that I work with has done for things like color turnovers is adding checkboxes in here that are specific to certain post houses. So a lot of times we do what we call pre-flighting a workflow. We'll take and do a test edit and then send a couple of different versions of an EDL file tracking which of these checkboxes work for their set of tools. And that way we can ensure that it's smooth on their end. We know exactly what to export and they're happy with what they receive. So these are just a couple of quick examples of some of the things that I work on as part of the film and television workflow team based in Santa Monica. Once again, I'm just going to bring up some of the URLs here that I was talking about. If you're looking to see some more information, see some of the different videos that we've done that cover some of these different workflows, again, this is the URL. It will take you to a YouTube playlist that not only has a series of specific tutorials that will teach you how these different workflows happen, but you can also hear directly from some of the people in Hollywood cutting rooms talking about how they use Adobe tools. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys so much. Another wonderful presenter up next, so please stay right where you are. Thank you.